Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. If you listened to the previous episode, then you know that I'm mixing things up a bit. This is part 2 of a 2-part series in which I'm the one in the hot seat. This episode is a repost of my recent appearance on the Truth and Dare podcast, a wonderfully inspiring show that features in-depth conversations about personal growth, risk-taking, and living life to the fullest. In the first part of this 2-part series, you'll remember it was a detailed discussion around my professional interests, land, water, and agriculture. This conversation on Truth and Dare is equally detailed and deep, but focused almost exclusively on my personal life. My journey from North Carolina to the West, my obsession with long-distance running, the crazy way that I met my wife, lessons learned from a semester of Knowles, how my wife and girls' influence has made me a much better person, and much, much more. Many of the books and ideas that we've talked about on Mountain and Prairie play a big role in my personal evolution, from wannabe real estate developer to conservationist. So I wanted to share this with you all. As you'll hear, the host Camden is a curious, kind, and natural conversationalist who likes to talk deeply about subjects of substance, not surface-level nonsense. I was turned on to her podcast when she interviewed my friend, artist, surfer, and family man Kevin Mirsky, and I was thrilled and a little nervous when she asked me to join her on her show. But we had an instant connection and had a great conversation that I hope you'll enjoy. But regardless of my episode, if you're interested in personal growth and stories of people who've taken unconventional paths, then you should definitely give Truth and Dare a listen. Huge thanks to Camden for having me on. Huge thanks to you all for listening. And I'll be back with normal Mountain and Prairie episodes in the next few days. Thanks a lot.
Welcome to the thought-provoking podcast, Truth and Dare, where you're invited to live life from the inside out, find your courage to let go of the edge, and align your life with your truth and your dare. And now, your host, Camden Hoke.
Hello, and welcome. It's Camden. We're at Truth and Dare, and you have landed here today, and I am so happy to welcome you, and I'm happy to welcome my guest today. So I'm not solo today. I love going solo, but I love having a conversation. Like, it's one of the things that I feel like I thrive on, and actually, before we started, we were just talking about that. Like, don't you love it when you can just sit down and have that connection and that vision talk and not be like at the surface or that place of BS. Like, I don't know, maybe it sometimes can be uncomfortable, but there's such growth there and such possibility. And so that's really my intention in these conversations, is that we get to hang out together. And my guest today, I'll tell you his name in a minute, but I'm going to share a little bit about him because I love sharing first, so you can have this vision, and then the name, and then the voice, and you get to put it all together. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He combines nearly 2 decades of finance and real estate experience with a lifelong love of open space and wild places. He currently serves as the conservation director at Palmer Land Trust. This is an innovative and highly effective land conservation organization that protects Southern Colorado's working agricultural lands, recreational open space, and stunning scenic vistas. Can you just see it? Like, I mean, so beautiful. Now, prior to that, he spent his career in the business world, having worked extensively in ranch brokerage, commercial real estate, and finance. His formal education also centered around business, and he holds a BA in economics and an MBA with a concentration in finance from Wake Forest University. As a passion project, he hosts the Mountain and Prairie podcast, which you guys got to listen to this. We're going to give you that in the resources section too. Amazing, amazing interviews. This podcast features long form interviews with innovators of the American West and has been recognized by organizations including the Aspen Institute and High Country News. Now, he has a life outside of all of this, even though he is this achieving, brilliant man. Outside of the office, he's focused on mountain sports and having run numerous 50 and 100-mile ultra marathons through the Western backcountry and also climbed Denali. Crazy, like adventure, amazing. He's going to fit right in here, right? He calls Colorado Springs home, where he lives with his wife and 2 young daughters. So I want to welcome Ed Robertson to the show today. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you for having me. That's I have a hard time believing that person is me. That sounded really good.
I love that. Like, that's one of the best parts, right? It's like when you hear somebody talk about you, right? It's like, oh my gosh, that's really neat. Is that me? So
as long as they're saying good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm hoping that everybody's noticing that we both have Southern accents here. So we may get a little more deeply Southern, and we'll just see where this goes today, right?
Yes, I hope so. Yes.
All right. So I want to kick this off with a question that, is not surface, because we're not about that. But
right.
If we were talking to your 5-year ago self, and I just put 5 in there, but maybe there's another number, maybe it's 8 years or 4 years at a pivotal point in your life. But if we were talking to that 5-year ago self, who would we be meeting today? Would it look different than you today?
I think it would look pretty similar on the surface, like at least in my professional world. I think it would be fairly similar. I was living here in the West in Colorado. At that point, I was still in the ranch brokerage business, but I spent a lot of my personal energy and I did a lot of side projects focused on conservation. A lot of my business in the ranch brokerage world was based around working with conservation buyers and sellers and doing conservation deals. And so I had not yet made the transition into full-time conservation, but that was definitely on my mind. But I think the main thing is I didn't have any kids at that point. I'd been married for about 5 years at that point and been with my wife for 3 years before we got married. But we didn't have any kids yet. And I've got an almost 4-year-old and a 1-year-old now. And so that is a huge, huge, huge change that has changed my life. Just hard to even put it into words. All the cliches you hear about being a parent are true for a reason, or cliches for a reason because they're true. And that really, really kind of changed my perspective on things and may have led to, the thought process that eventually led me to walk away from the for-profit world and try to focus my energy on something that meant more to me. And also I didn't have my podcast at that point, and that has become a really big part of my life. Surprisingly, I would have never guessed that I would have a podcast, but I do. And so yeah, on the surface, pretty similar, but really a lot different when you go down a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. So do you have girls or boys?
2 girls, 4-year-old. Yeah. She'll be 4 in like a few weeks, and then a 1-year-old.
Okay. So we have 2 girls too, except a little different age. Our youngest just turned 16 and our oldest turned 17 just a couple months ago. So
wow.
if you need to talk later and as you go along in the years, just call me up. Okay.
I will. I can promise you I will.
So was marriage always kind of in your mind and having a family, or was that something that came as a surprise to you?
Yeah, I think it was. I come from a great family and great parents, and I have a younger sister. And I mean, it's not something I really like. There was a goal, in the Southeast, sometimes that can be a goal for people, or it's the idea like I have to get married at a certain age. I have to start having kids. It was never like that for me at all. And, I met my wife. We sat down next to each other in the Dallas airport, like randomly out of nowhere. I just sat down in this seat. I'd been on this airplane and the pilot said the plane's broken. Everybody needs to get off. I'm sitting there in this seat. And then this cute blonde girl sits down next to me and we start talking. And next thing you know, 3 years later, we're married. I mean, it's insane. And so there was no, and now there are 2 humans on earth because of that. But there was, I think I always wanted that. And I definitely wanted kids. But it was never like a goal. And I'm glad it wasn't, because I think it all happened at the right time, just as it should have. Again, in a way that I could have never predicted.
I love that. Those are like the best situations and the best adventures that we go on in life, is like when we don't expect something and then you see all the things that grow out of that. That's what I call like an awe moment or experience.
Oh yeah. And being open to those, I think, is key. I think it can be easy to get hung up on focusing in on your goal and your plan and this kind of thing. But sometimes a lot of the best stuff comes when you're not on the plan. I mean, I think my whole life is a result of that, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Something just popped into my head. I want to ask you this, because I, obviously come from this women's perspective, and I'm a recovered controller.
Yeah.
As a person who's been in finance, and, numbers are very like cut and dried and things like that. Did you ever consider yourself a controlling person, or were you always more free flowing?
I think I've always been pretty free flowing, And I think when you hear the finance stuff and the number stuff, it's I think in a way I was able to kind of will myself into doing that. I don't know that it really comes naturally, and I wouldn't have known that. If you talk about the 5 year ago person, I wouldn't have known there was any option other than that. But I think I've generally kind of been open to experiences and open to kind of going with the flow. I mean, I think I can be very hard on myself just about accomplishing my goals, but it's not necessarily like this very detailed plan with all these numbers and metrics I need to hit. I mean, there's just like, I set a big goal and then I get it done. And so I wouldn't say that I've been all that controlling about things. I think I can generally go with the flow pretty well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, and I know you have shared with me that you've had a few experiences in your life which are quite adventurous. We're going to be diving into some of those as in our conversation, but I want to also touch back on the parenting, because I know, a lot of our listeners are parents and they're juggling. And especially with young kids, like you have, an entrepreneurial sense, and you're in conservation and what you're doing, and you're also married. And how has it been introducing kids into the mix? Like, I know there can be lovely things, and then there can also be challenges. So go into a few of those for us.
Yeah, I'd say with one kid, it only improved things for me, as far as just looking at it completely selfishly, not thinking about it, any other prism other than just like, what am I going to accomplish? And I think it forced me to tighten up my schedule, and it forced me to be more efficient. And I was still, with one kid, I was still training for long runs. And at that point, we lived in Boulder, Colorado, and we lived about 3 blocks from the trails. And when my oldest daughter was like 1.5, I think. I mean, I was training for a 100-miler, and that's a lot of time just spent out on the trails running. And it because I wanted to be home with her and with my wife, I would get up at I'd be running at 4 a.m. and I'd go out and run 30 miles and run all over these mountains. I'd run for like 8 hours, but I'd be back for lunch. And I would have never considered that ever before we had kids. Before we had kids, I'd kind of mess around and do some things and then go running it around lunchtime and get done around dinner time. And it was just kind of go with the flow, whatever. And I found over the course of having these kids that I like having those constraints. I think having constraints for me is good versus just a free for all, do whatever you want, because when I can do whatever I want, I end up not doing anything. And so these kids put these really tight constraints, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I would rather be with them than running. But I know the running is important for me, for a lot of reasons. And so, with one kid, I found it just improved things. With 2 kids, you've got the system really tight, and then the second kid comes and there's no give in the system when you're doing all the different stuff that my wife and I do, sports, work, then this podcast thing on the side and everything else. And so it's, that has been a challenge. But again, it's just forced me to go harder and be more efficient. And I like that. And I feel like I'm at my best when I'm going as hard as I possibly can. I'm obsessed with Theodore Roosevelt, and that's kind of how he was. And I balance it with things. It's not like a manic kind of thing, because I balance it with meditation, and it's not like I'm working myself into a frenzy. But if I can get up at 5 and go as hard as I can all day and go to bed at 10 and haven't spent any time in there messing around, that's a wonderful day to me. And the more I can do that over and over and over, the better I feel. It's not like I like doing it when I'm in the middle of it. But I know that is the recipe for me to be at my best and be happy, which translates into my family being happy is if I'm in a better mood,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I'm hearing like creatively fulfilled. I'm hearing, and my youngest daughter says this a lot. She's like, it's satisfying. Like at the end of the day, it's satisfying. And it's even more than that. You're just like, this feels really good because you've had your personal space. You've really honored that, by running and meditating and whatever that is. You've honored that space of knowledge and serving others and being with your family and loving and connection. So it just feels like a real honoring practice that you have for yourself.
I think so. And I think I just thought about it as you were saying that. I mean, I think the key that makes it a good experience is I like everything I'm doing. I like my job, and I like the podcast, and I like my family, and I like exercising. Or at least I say I like the idea. When you're throwing up on the side of the trail, that's not great. But
like the after effects of how you feel, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would be a lot harder if I didn't like, especially my job. If I didn't like that, that's minimum of 8 hours a day doing something you don't like. And I think that could be draining, but it's almost like everything fuels it. It's this endless cycle. And as long as I keep my foot on the gas, it only gets better, I think. And that's not just me. I mean, my wife is amazing, and she is a very good, kind of unbiased third party who can gauge my moods, and I can be moody. And she would agree that, when I'm going as hard as I can, I'm at my best. So I think and it's hard. I mean, it's difficult. It's not easy getting up at 5 a.m. every day and all that kind of stuff. But the overall result is great for me personally.
Mm-hmm. I hear that. Okay. I don't think we've talked about this, but did you know that we lived in Boulder too?
I don't think I did know that. No, I didn't know that. When were you there?
We were there from 2011 to 2013.
Oh, well, we were there at the same time. We were there. Yeah.
I love it.
I lived right up near Chautauqua.
So we lived over in North Boulder because we just moved from Georgia. Long story. We had like a 10-year journey that we were gone from California. So we had 2 little kids. We lived in St. Simons for 7 years off the coast of Georgia there. And then we just were like, all right, we need to edge our way back out west because we always knew we wanted to be back this way. And I was working in a company, and it was like, I checked out Boulder and I'm like, this is cool. People are happy. They're exercising. They're outside. They're eating good food. Did you feel that way? I was like, wow, that's awesome, Yeah,
it's cool. It's and the landscape is cool, and the trails are really cool. Over the course, we moved there. My wife had lived there when we met, and she had been there before, a long time before. But we were both in grad school. Then we got married, and we lived abroad for a year. Then we moved to Boulder. And I'll tell you though, just in that time period, like 2010 through when we left like a year and a half ago, in some ways it changed because a lot of these tech companies opened up offices there, and it took on, the real estate prices went through the roof, and it started taking on a bit of a different kind of vibe than it used to when we were there. And I mean, and the thing is, I kind of do my own thing, and I don't, it's not like I'm hanging out downtown and going shopping and that kind of thing, but so it didn't affect me all that much, but I was there for the mountains and for the trails, and to be able to get out on those trails, and so it was great. It was great for that. I mean, I don't think I'll ever live anywhere with that kind of access to that much vertical gain and that many miles. It's awesome.
I agree. We live not too far from Sanitas, right?
Yes.
So that was great to go up there. And then Luke was always, doing different hikes, and we just loved it. And I agree with you. I think that we were just there in February. We have some really good friends there, and I have a couple of clients there. And, number one, the traffic is like crazy, and a lot has changed. I feel like since even we left, and, like you said, there's some tech companies, there's a lot of building, and it's not quite the small town feel that it had, I felt like, when we were there. And yet you're like, well, okay, there's cool entrepreneurial growth. So where do you stop that? Or do you, and so, yeah, it's becoming something different. That's all. So.
Yeah. And that's the way it goes. It's a cool place. And that's what happens in cool places. And so it's, no bitterness on my part there, but we found a really good deal down here in the Springs with similar outdoor access and just kind of a lifestyle that fits with what we're interested in at this point in our lives, which is cool.
Well, and I love the outdoor, like mountain biking and hiking. There's nothing like that air. So I remember, growing up in the South, it's like super humid, right? And I just had the hardest time running. I was like, I'd be on the soccer team, and I would hide in the bushes as they were coming around for like the other laps, because I was like, oh, it's just too thick. I can't even breathe.
Yes.
And moving out to California and then being in Colorado, even with the altitude, did not bother me in Colorado, but there's something about the air that was just like energized me. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, I think it's just it's arid and it's clear. The sun's a little bit hotter. Not having that humidity is huge, and it's definitely energizing. Just the landscape in general sounds kind of silly to say, but I mean the whole just being out there in the mountains, whether it's in Boulder or up in the real mountains, it's definitely energizing. I mean, I feel like that's fuel for me. I mean, it's almost like medicine for me, in that it keeps me, the mental benefits far outweigh any physical benefits of the exercise. And it has to be outside. I don't get any mental, if anything, I come out of gyms kind of halfway depressed because they're just kind of depressing. but being out, outside, and whether it's, in the mountains or in your neck of the woods surfing, I mean, it's, I love it.
It is. It's beautiful. Now, how did you get into, if somebody's like, I want to run an ultra marathon, where did you start? When did this start in your life?
I signed up for a 50 miler, and I never even run a marathon. And I just said, all right, I'm going to run a 50 miler.
Okay. Serious.
Yeah. I think we had moved to town after, into Boulder, and, that's everybody in Boulder is super fit. And I'd seen we live right there on the trails, and I just started trail running. I remember when I left my house, the farthest race I'd ever run during grad school, I ran a race one time that was 18 miles. And I could not believe that I'd gone that far. It was the craziest thing. And so then I started just seeing some of these ultra runner guys, and I read that book, Born to Run, like a lot of people did. And it just kind of intrigued me. And I started, I was right there on the trails. And so I started doing more and more. And I'm kind of had this personality trait where I don't do anything unless I have a really hard, almost scary goal. And I wasn't all that interested in a marathon for some reason, because I've been running since college, but I'd never run a marathon. And so I just signed up for the Leadville 50 and just started running. And it, trial and error, just go out. And the key about ultra running is, the funny thing about it is, if you're anybody except a professional, a lot of it is not running. A lot of it is walking and hiking and, trying to just kind of keep going. And so I signed up for the Leadville 50 and trained really hard. I was really scared I wasn't going to be able to do it, and was able to knock it out. The training was hard, just trying to figure out the nutrition. I mean, I think if you've never done any of that stuff, you can get there physically. That is not the question. The real kind of science experiment aspect of ultra running is figuring out the nutrition, because you got to be able to fuel yourself for that long. And some people can do well with certain foods and some people can't. And there's just this trial and error period of figuring out exactly what food will work and what won't. And there's a lot of throwing up and a lot of just having upset stomachs. But I remember I'd been training. I couldn't get the food right. And like right at 3 or 4 hours of running, my stomach would start hurting real bad, and I started getting real frustrated. And then one day, I figured it out. I got the right combo of food, and it worked. And then all of a sudden, I was like, well, I can do this. And I mean, you literally can run for like 48 hours nonstop. I mean, you can, or run and walk and just stop moving. I mean, I've gone for 34 hours straight before without stopping. It's the craziest thing. And I'm not a great athlete. I mean, I wasn't a good athlete on team sports. And, it's kind of three things, the physical part, obviously. But that's kind of the easiest part. And then the nutrition part, and then the mental part, just keeping yourself in a good headspace, not letting yourself get negative, staying upbeat, forcing yourself to smile. It's amazing how effective that is. At 3 a.m, when you're out in the middle of the woods, you do that and it gives you energy. It's pretty neat.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you said smile, because it does. It changes the energy. When people that do EFT, and you're smiling and you're tapping and things like that, because it is like you're looking at, am I at that low vibration, that frequency? Like, where am I right now? And, or am I at the high frequency? So, question for you, what was the secret to the nutrition? What did you discover?
It was funny because what I discovered then now doesn't work anymore, but it was just a certain combo of these certain energy foods, these like Cliff Bars, and I can't even remember exactly what it was. And I think one of the main thing was just upping the amount of water I was drinking. I wasn't drinking enough water, but as I did those things over the years, I try to do one race a year, and I moved very, very far away from all those goos and Cliff shots and all that kind of fake food into more real food, and more like I'd eat a lot of nut butters, almond butters and that kind of thing. And almost, those goos they're basically pure sugar. And I think of that as like jet fuel. And when you're running very, very slow for 12, 15, 20, 30 hours, you need slow burning like coal. Instead, you don't need jet fuel, you need coal. And so you think about the high fat in nut butters, almond butters, that's kind of perfect for that. And like I did a race one time and they had a bunch of bacon at the aid stations, and I ate bacon the whole time, and it was great fuel because it's got salt, protein, and a lot of fat. And that fat is key, but it's, everybody's different, and there's no way to figure it out other than do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Bacon. I had this visual in my mind, like I remember those little stations that I've like volunteered at and stuff like that, and having a table with bacon. I've never seen that, but that was an interesting visual. I like that.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's finding what works, and everybody's got something, and you don't know until you get into the experience and you start to experiment. Or, some people might say, well, it's too hard. I just can't do this. I'm going to give up. But it's like, no, just keep going. Like you can figure this out. There's a solution, So.
Yeah. And that's I don't really consider myself, like I don't really identify as a runner. I don't think of myself as a runner or a mountain climber or any of that. I just do these things. And I mean, the reason I do them is because they make me better at real life, the stuff that matters. If you can, or at least in theory that they do, if you can get your head around that kind of the suffering that's involved in some of these things, it can sometimes make it easier to deal with kind of silly, kind of surface level nonsense at work or that kind of thing. I mean, the whole point of it to me is the race or the summit or whatever is not the end goal by any means. I mean, the end goal, the process of training, and then the lessons learned from those experiences. I think that's why I do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you're right on that. I think that, we start to see then how resilient we are. That's where we build that place of courage. I mean, that's why this podcast is called Truth and Dare. And it's called that because that's how I realized I was living and how I grew, was that when I was younger, I was like, I was kind of afraid, or I didn't even really know what was true for me because I was so afraid of judgment. I had low self-esteem, low confidence, and all that. But I was the first one to take the dare. And especially if I've been drinking a little bit, I'd be like, all right, yeah, I'm going to try that. I'll jump off that bridge, or I'll funnel that beer, or I'll do this or whatever. And I could do anything. But I realized, I was like, well, wait a minute, there is a healthy way to do this. Right. So let me choose that way. So it was like still going to the edge and like skydiving or ultra marathon, whatever it is that person takes on that is their own dare, and then really experiencing it and and having to call upon things maybe you've never had to call upon before to come to a solution to get through it, right?
Completely. I completely agree with all that. I mean, I think that is, it's for me, it is kind of silly. Like I heard the guy, Yvon Chouinard, who started Patagonia, I heard him, he was quoting somebody be referred to mountain climbers as conquistadors of the useless. Like in the end, it's a silly thing. And if you look at the results of these races or anything, like I'm not good at it. It's not like I'm coming in the top 10 or anything. I mean, but just the process of putting yourself in these extremely hard, physically hard situations. I just think there's so many benefits to that. And that's one thing I want to somehow figure out how to do to my, I want my girls to be able to experience that I'm not going to be some crazy, coach dad trying to push them or take out my insecurities on them. But there are just so many important lessons to be learned, at least in my life, from physical struggle. And I mean, I'd say most of the most important lessons in my life have come from just getting my ass whipped physically in one way or the other. There's just no way to fake that other than to do it.
Mm-hmm. And we remember that, it's like we remember getting through tough times. We remember when we fall down and get back up. We remember when we checked in with ourselves and had to come up with some sort of solution, even in like moments of like emergency when you're out there and you're like, okay, what do I need to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big thing. And I think it's important to equip your daughters with that because I'll tell you, I've been through some situations and I know a lot of women and even men can say they've been in situations where they have felt threatened in certain situations and, been with boys or whatever's been going on. And it's like, you've got to be able to say no. You've got to be able to touch into that deep intuition and be able to speak for what you need, and speak from that true voice,
I completely know. And I think that the ability to speak up comes from confidence, and confidence, I think, comes from a lot of things. But I've gained so much confidence personally from these hard physical things, and they're hard physically, but that means they're hard mentally, and then you're forced to get through it, and then you realize you can, and it just builds up that confidence a little bit more, and you keep doing it over and over. And I think that's where sports are important. I'm sure there are other ways to do it, and I will customize, however my daughters need it, but it's so important. Thinking about those girls, that is it's much more important that they get those benefits than I do, because I don't need it really at this point, but they're going to need it for everything they have ahead of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, I was listening to one of your podcasts and I overheard you say that you've been to Knowles.
Yes.
Participated in that. And I wondered, because you had your first trip out west and fell in love with that. I want to hear a little bit about that too, about Knowles and your love of outdoors. And I think that's part of building resilience too. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I credit my experience on Knowles with being one of the most formative, if not the most formative experience of my life. I mean, obviously the influence of my parents and my family, but there are kind of two experiences that I credit. And I went to boarding school, which was a wonderful experience, which really got me on a great path. And then during college, I went on Knowles, and that just changed my whole life. As far as just on a practical level, learning these outdoor skills. That's where Knowles stands for National Outdoor Leadership School, and it's a little bit different than Outward Bound, and that Knowles was basically created to train Outward Bound instructors. And so Outward Bound is great. My wife's done 3 Outward Bound courses, but their focus is more character development through the outdoors, whereas Knowles is just hardcore skills development. And through that, you get character development, but it's, you're learning mountaineering, you're learning climbing, you're learning sailing. And so during college, I did a semester in the Pacific Northwest, and it was 3 months of backpacking, mountaineering, rock climbing, sailing, and all over. We were in North Cascades. We were down at Smith Rock. We hiked along the coast in Olympic Peninsula. Sailed up in British Columbia, and the hilarious thing is I got college credit for this thing. It was as if I was in college for a semester. It was like the biggest scam ever. And I mean, but the thing is, it was the most educational experience I had in college. I don't remember any college such a waste of time for me. And that Knowles experience, I mean, I think about it daily, and I'm 20 years out from it now.
Well, you learn so much. Couldn't everybody benefit from something like that? I mean, this is survival skills. This is living skills. And while college is great, it's like having that experience. Well, how would that benefit if everybody had that too?
Oh, it just gave me so much confidence. It gave me kind of, when I think about that experience, I learned all these skills that have translated into everything I've done. And I think it laid the groundwork for my current career. But the main takeaway was my group was 9 guys, I think age 18 through maybe like 27. So just a bunch of loudmouth guys in the woods together. And it was great, but towards the end, so we had been together for 2.5 months, and then they say the last section they put us on these 34-foot sailboats, and so we'd been out there in the wild, in the wide open spaces, and they cram us in this boat together, and we were about to kill each other just because a bunch of testosterone fueled guys just at each other's throats. And I remember there was a point where I realized I was so ready to go home at that point, and then I realized all right, I'm here in British Columbia, sailing in this beautiful area, doing exactly what I want to do. And I said, the only thing I can control here is my attitude. I can't control what any of these guys are doing. I can't control any of this, mouthing off everybody's doing. And that idea of I can only control myself is such a valuable lesson that has carried over and has served me well in just regular life and in work and everything. And Knowles, I cannot recommend that enough for people. It was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. Very, very well run, safe. You're climbing mountains, you're hanging off cliffs and all that, but it is safe. And for any parents who have kids, high school, college, I couldn't recommend it enough. In some ways, I wish I'd done it earlier.
It sounds amazing. And I wonder, too, I keep thinking of you as a younger boy. When you were little, were you one of those kids where you knew what you wanted to be, or, did you have any ideas on that, or what you're doing now? Is that a complete surprise to you?
Well, what I'm doing now is a complete surprise. I would have never thought that I was doing kind of anything that I've done. When I was a kid, I used to think about mountain climbing trips or whatever. I thought that was cool, but I didn't really understand it. It just seemed like something interesting. I think every little boy would think that. When I was a kid, I think I really wanted to be a doctor. That was kind of my goal and what I thought I wanted to do. And I think the reason for that is because my grandfather, who was in the same town, the small town where I grew up, he was the town doctor and the town mayor, and a real leader in that town. And my dad has gone on to take on a similar role. He's not a doctor; he was in business, but very similar, kind of a community leader. And looking back on it, I don't know that I really cared about medicine as much as I just admired him and thought he just seemed like he was kind of gruff, but just a real amazing guy. Like he was the mayor when that small town went through civil rights integration, and just this like no joke, like the Ku Klux Klan, threatening him because he was obviously on the side of integration and having to stand up to that kind of nonsense. And so I think I just had doctor in my head, and I'm so glad that didn't work out. I'd say doctor was it. And there's really been nothing. I think is less doctor and more, I think that the idea behind being a leader and doing something you're passionate about, I think that is kind of the energy I was attracted to with both him and with my dad, is just this idea of doing work that is important and being a leader in your community, wherever that is. I think that is more important than actually what I ended up doing, if that makes any sense.
Totally makes sense. I totally hear you. And I look at, like, you're in conservation, and I wondered if you share a little bit about that with us, because, there's so much land. Like where we live here, we're in Marin County, we have a lot of free and open space, and we know it's never going to be built on. There's not a lot of that's left in certain areas. So what drew you to conservation? Was it something you fell into? Did it find you? How did that happen?
Kind of crazy story, really. So I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 2005 to sell ranches. I was in the commercial real estate business in North Carolina, and I'd always wanted to live out west. or I'd gotten more and more focused on living out west. But I think I took myself too seriously at age 22 just to go be a ski bum like I should have. And so finally I was like, I got to get out there, and found out about jobs selling ranches. I couldn't believe that was a real job. And I just kept hassling companies, and I was selling commercial real estate. So I did have real estate experience, but I finally got a group to hire me, and I moved out to Jackson Hole and started doing that. And it was during the real estate boom, and it was full speed, just people making so much money and so many transactions happening. And I worked with a lot of real estate developers, and they were kind of my clients. And I saw, I felt like for every dollar I was making, they were making $100, because, at that time it was crazy, and anybody could be a real estate developer. And so I actually went back to business school with the intention of being a real estate developer. That's why I went to school, which is the exact opposite of what I'm doing now. But during business school, I had a pretty significant health scare, combined with the economy crashed. And so I kind of had a perfect storm of all this crazy stuff happened that forced me, I think I was 31 at the time, maybe I was 30, that forced me to, it almost gave me like a midlife crisis, because I went to business school completely focused on making as much money as possible. And then all of a sudden that health scare made me realize that I don't think I really care about that as much as I thought I did. And the economy crashed, and you saw these kind of clown developers had half-built developments in these beautiful mountain valleys, and then they just declared bankruptcy and walked away. And they had ruined these landscapes. And the landscape of the West is fragile, and it's not going to grow back in a generation. And so they had ruined these places. And so that's kind of what started the process of me understanding the importance of conservation. I still didn't really understand what it meant or what land conservation was or anything like that, but that changed my perspective. And when I got back into the ranch brokerage business, I decided to do it in a way focused on the conservation side of things, trying to work with conservation-minded landowners. That worked well to a point, but when you're a broker, you have a fiduciary duty to your client to make them as much money as possible. So if you're working for somebody trying to sell their beautiful ranch, and a developer comes along and says they're going to pay more than the conservation group, you got to sell it to the developer. And there just came a point where I realized that I had a lot of great experience professionally and educationally, and that could be better applied to doing something that was important to me versus just chasing dollars. Because, I was working with good people and I did some cool deals that led to permanently conserved open space, but it was half at best. And so now I decided about a year ago to go all in on the conservation, and it was the best decision I've made.
I love hearing that, and what I also love hearing, and what we talk about a lot, is just a personal evolution.
Yes.
There's this trust that things show up. They really do. And they speak to your heart. And it's like, am I going to listen, or am I caught in fear? Like, where am I going from here? Even when you had that scare, like looking at these things as showing us opportunities and possibilities rather than catastrophizing and getting stuck in them. And I think we have many midlife, I call them opportunities. I don't think they're just at 50, as when I remember my parents having one and both buying Corvettes at the same time and thinking, where in the hell are me and brother going to sit? I don't know. But I look at it like it is an opportunity, and it just means there's something new for you. So I love that evolution that you're really following and being true to,
Yeah, it's cool. And another thing worth mentioning that I think is the most important ingredient in all that is I met my wife in that airport just before I went to grad school. And I was in the process of applying. It was like the winter before I went to grad school. And her influence cannot be overstated as far as, one, giving me the confidence to actually consider doing other things. And then two, just she is a very reasonable, and she spent most of her career in international development, and has a kind of a humanitarian's outlook on things, and has professional experience to back that up. And I think I just kind of had this simple idea of, you get out of school and you make as much money as possible. And then seeing her and she's 10 times smarter than me and 10 times more accomplished, but seeing that she's applying this brain power that she has, that she could literally be a rocket scientist. She's a genius, and she's applying that to making the world better. I think that that kind of cracked this shell I had around my head about this silly idea of just, you got to make more money. And I don't know where that came from, because that's not how my parents are. But I definitely had it. And thankfully, my wife helped me see how what a loser's game that can be, just chasing dollars,
Mm-hmm. What's your wife's name?
Kim.
Kim, I hope you're listening to this, because that was really beautiful, and he loves you so much. And you sound amazing, so I hope I get to talk to you sometime, Kim.
Yeah, she is amazing.
You know what? I think maybe it's the world, because, my oldest is getting ready and applying to colleges and things like that. And the things that she comes home and says, I'm like, we don't even talk about that at home. Like, where's this coming from? And it's like, well, I need to go out and make money. Or she'll say, well, I'm going to go here and I can get a job and work my way through school. And I'm like, we never told you had to do that. Like, where's that coming from? Or, all these different things. Or I got to get out and make money. Or I need to just go to these schools. And I'm thinking, I think a lot of that happens in school, just the wave of the world, the wave of what's happening around us.
Yeah, it's the system. And I, through my jobs, especially selling ranches, I've had the sometimes good fortune, sometimes nightmare of hanging around extremely wealthy people, like billionaires. And what I found with the majority of them is they're not in it for money. Like, they're playing a different game, and money is a byproduct. I mean, I think they've obviously got something in them that wants to accumulate, but as far as the end game of making money, like Bill Gates did not do what he did to make a lot of cash. He was playing a different game. Same with Warren Buffett. And I think people who are just chasing a paycheck, it's just a very hollow thing. And I don't have anything against the capitalist system or anything like that. I mean, obviously, the way the economy is set up has made my life very, very nice. But I think there's got to be some passion fueling it, and and everybody needs to make a living, obviously. But I think there needs to be passion fueling it, whether it's my passion for land conservation, or some of these like Bill Gates, his passion to win no matter what. But if you're just chasing money, you're not gonna. I couldn't imagine you're going to get that far. You know what I mean?
I do. And I know Richard Branson talks about that too. It's like, if you just do that, it's not going to be fulfilling. And I think sometimes too, just chasing that could be based on something that's fear-based, or feeling inadequate or lack in some way too. And what I know and what I believe is that we're vibration and frequency, and money is simply an energy as well. So if we're chasing it, then it could be staying away from us, especially if we're coming from a place of lack. So it's like, okay, what is my priority? What do I really want? What do I want to be doing in the world? And how am I being, and how is that affecting that doing? So a little maybe woo-woo, but that's where I come from. And it is looking at what are the priorities here, because if you want to make a ton of money, you can.
Yes.
And it depends on where you're coming from, but you don't want to use that as your main fulfillment factor, because that's not going to do it.
Yeah, you can never reach it. I mean, it's never, there's always going to be somebody with more. And I'm not, everybody needs to make a living, and I'm not trashing anybody's career choices, but I just feel like now that I'm doing something that is kind of fills this part of my system that I didn't even really know that was an option, being excited and getting this fulfillment from work that I didn't know was possible. Now looking back, it's like, man, I don't understand what I was doing before, but all part of the process.
Well, yeah, and you found it from the inside. If we're looking for things outside to fill us, and that's our first place we look, I think there's an issue that's not going to match. That's not going to happen. But if we first look inside and we're following our alignment evolution, or what we're meant to be doing, or what I would call intuitive purpose, then we're coming from the inside, and it's a very different place to build your life from the inside out.
I agree completely.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, so obviously the podcast is called Truth and Dare, and I wanted to know for you, and we've touched around it a little bit as we've been talking, but how would you define truth as it relates to your true voice?
It's hard for me to say. I feel like when when I met Kim, combined with some of those other crazy experiences, it caused me to a lot of the kind of nonsense to break away, and I was able to kind of pursue more what I wanted to pursue. And I'm not saying it was easy or that I instantly figured it out or anything like that, but I think I don't know. It's just hard to really try to drill down and figure out what is true underneath what you're doing. I mean, I think for me, it was a case of trying a lot of different stuff and then kind of finally ending up into something that I'm passionate about. Both work, professional work, and the podcast stuff, and family, and all that. And it seems to have all kind of come together in the last 3 or 4 years, which is really cool. But I don't know how I would have found it otherwise, because, like I said, everything I'm doing now, I didn't even know any of it existed. I mean, podcast didn't exist. I didn't know anything about land conservation, and so it was kind of this process of just continuously trying new things and then finding something that fit. And I wish somebody could have told me, like, this is what you do to find out what the truth is, or your true purpose, or the work you can do that will be fulfilling. But honestly, looking back, I don't know that there was any way to do it other than just kind of smashing against the walls, hitting the guardrails until I figured it out. So I think it's just that embracing the process is huge, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So let me talk about intuition for a moment. Do you feel like you're very intuitive and you have this space of whether it's listening or feeling or even seeing things for your life?
I think I am intuitive. I think I'm intuitive with people. People have told me that. I think I can get reads on people pretty quickly. I'm not saying I figure out everything or make some judgment about them right off the bat, but I think generally I can get a good idea of what's going on in a situation with people, and relationships between people. I think that serves me well in career stuff. But I think I've gotten more intuitive as I've gotten older, or relied more on that instinct, which is interesting because you hear about people say as you get older, you get more conservative and kind of stuck in your ways. But, on a political spectrum, I've gotten unbelievably more liberal the older I get. And I just see it only continuing. And then I've gotten more kind of creative and more, focus on, being intuitive versus just data. And it's kind of interesting because it's the exact opposite of what you hear a lot of people do as they get old.
Right. I'm hearing you. So, I also think, I think you're very intuitive. It feels like that because several reasons that you said, but also you have some great conversations. Just from me listening to your podcast, I'm like, you're able to connect in. You're very easy to talk to like this. I find that people who are very connected within themselves and know themselves on a certain level feel very comfortable being out and having these conversations that are, deeper and more about vision and not so surface. So to me, that's part of being intuitive too.
Yeah, there's probably something about being willing to be a little vulnerable, and because nobody's going to open up to you unless you open up to them, and so you got to, I think there's got to be some authenticity there, and being willing to be vulnerable about tell stuff about yourself that may surprise people, and I think I love it. I mean, I can't stand having surface level, and the older I get, the more frustrated I get with that. Just these kind of surface level nonsense conversations, and when I can talk with people about cool ideas or cool books, or I'm just very, very curious. And so that podcast has been a great outlet to kind of quench that desire I have.
I love that. And I love the word curious. And I want you to share how the podcast was born. I want you to share a little bit about what it was like to birth it, because it's like a baby too. And you had your children born and you had the podcast born. So tell me about how the podcast got started.
Well, kind of two ways. One is as we've talked about, I kind of inhabit all these kind of strange worlds that may not seem all that connected, like the ranching world and the farming world, and then land conservation, and then endurance sports, and just all these. And I read a ton, and I have all these different interests. But I found in my work and hobbies that I'd meet all these super interesting people doing this, that were involved in all these little worlds I was involved in. And first of all, they were just all really, really cool and interesting. And then second of all, there was this overlap where between all these worlds, like some hardcore right wing, maybe like a Trump supporting type rancher had a lot of similarities with far, far left wing Bernie Sanders supporting ultra runner, this love of open space, love of public lands. And it just seemed like there was all these commonalities that nobody else was really seeing or exploring. And I just thought, man, I bet that could be an interesting podcast. And I would drive so much for my job. I was always listening to podcasts, and I thought, I bet I could do that. And then kind of going back to that endless thing about making more money, I also thought, if I do this, it'll help me sell more ranches. And I'll make a lot of money selling real estate. And so I started it started with people I knew, working in the ranching world and the conservation world and the athletics world, and just started doing it. And really with no expectation. It did lead to a little bit of business here and there, but pretty quickly, or not quickly, but like over the course of a year, it kind of started taking on a life of its own, and more and more people started listening, and it just continued to build up, and it's the craziest thing. I can't believe it. I just can't believe that people listen to it, and it's not because of me. It's because of the guests that people listen. But it's just been an amazingly positive experience, and it's expanded my network. It's expanded my just knowledge base, and I really do think talking to all these inspiring people doing cool work is one of the factors that led me to make the leap into full-time conservation and quit chasing dollars, because all these interesting people I've talked to, and never a single one of them has said, I'm doing this because I need to make money or because I want to make money. They're doing what they do because they're passionate about it. Some of them made a ton of money, and some of them live in their car, but they're all passionate about what they're doing, and money is not what is driving them. And I really credit all these great people I've met with kind of changing my perspective a little bit farther that allowed me to take the leap into full-time conservation, which has been wonderful.
I love that. And so logistically, was there a learning curve for you when you were stepping out and, like getting your mic and like hearing yourself and getting your questions and all that? What was that? Was that confronting at all?
Oh yeah. I still don't listen to myself. I probably will not listen to this. No, I can't do it. I got invited to Aspen Institute, and I've been on C-SPAN. They're like playing my thing on C-SPAN, and I will not watch it. I cannot watch it. I can't.
Ed, we need to talk, honey. Okay.
No, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's like fingernails. It makes me. I don't know. I don't know. I don't like listening to myself talk. It's but anyway, it's my goal. I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. I don't know if you know who he is. Yeah. Everything I've done, a lot business and a lot creatively, I give him credit for, because, and his way of thinking, and his whole thing is just go and don't make excuses, just start doing the work. And I went to Best Buy one day, bought a $99 microphone, my $89 microphone, plugged it in my computer, and just started doing it. And I hadn't listened to the old one, so I couldn't tell you if they're awful, but I bet they're pretty bad. But the whole idea is like, I'm just having conversation. I'm just asking people questions, and I'm genuinely interested. And there was no real reason. It's not like I had any sponsors or anything like that. It's just, I'm doing it, and it's mine. I can do it however I want. And it's surprising looking back. It is kind of crazy to put that out there like that. And I wasn't more worried about it. But I just kind of did it and kept doing it. And, I think it's an example of if you just keep showing up. And that's what Seth Godin says. If you keep showing up and you keep producing work, if it's good, it will spread. If not, go back and try something else. Mm-hmm. I haven't spent any money on advertising or anything, and it's definitely spread around and gotten me some pretty neat opportunities. So who would have ever guessed,
I know. I love it. I love how when we're willing to take the risk or a dare, like really push ourselves, and just wait and see what opens up from that. And I love that he says that. You just got to get going on it. That's like, can be the hardest thing. It's just like, you just got to get going, get yourself over that hurdle, And,
oh yeah, definitely. The gear is a distraction. And that's what a lot of the people I've talked to on the podcast, I've talked to a lot of professional photographers, and they all say, use your iPhone. Like it does, the gear is not going to make you a professional photographer. There's something else there, and so there are a lot of factors there. But I think gear is a huge distraction.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can also become an excuse, where people are like,
Exactly.
well, I've got to get this and this and this. And it's like, it's time to just do it, because we'll always just try to get in our own way with things. But the more I find that you take those risks and those dares, the better you get at leaping in and just figuring it out. So
I agree completely, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So with that said, I always ask this, like, what's your dare right now for you? Whether it's your professional life, your podcast, just personal, do you have a dare that you're putting out there for yourself right now?
Let me think about that. I think it's just to continue to be open to new experiences and new people. And, it's easier said than done. And I think I've done a lot with that. I mean, if you looked at me when I went to business school, when I started going to graduate school versus where I am now, pretty much on any metric. I mean, you look at what I'm doing for work, the kind of people I hang around, what's important to me, physical fitness. I mean, the political leanings, it's all very, very, very different. And I think a lot of that is because of being willing to be open to new experiences and not write ideas off, really explore ideas and question things. And that's one thing I'm really, really drilling into my oldest girl is don't take anything at face value. You just could question, ask why, because a lot of times when you ask why, you realize there is no reason why, and you can do it however you want if you're willing to work hard enough. And so I think that's the thing is be open to new experiences and be curious. One of these billionaire guys that I met one time, he's actually a really good guy. And I know billionaire has baggage attached to it, but he said he's a extremely good guy. And he said, the key to this is whatever you're doing is you need to be willing to work harder than anybody else and be more curious than anybody else. And I think that's really, that spoke to me, and I continue to think about it, over a decade later, and kind of rambling, but I think being open to new experiences, being curious, and working my ass off is my wish for myself, I guess.
I hear you. Okay. One more question I want to ask you. It just popped into my head. If you could have anybody on your podcast to interview, who would that be?
Oh, man.
They could be dead or alive.
Oh, dead or alive, Theodore Roosevelt, no question.
I knew you were going to say that. Okay, so that's how about alive? Let's go alive too. Who would you ask?
Well, one of the guys I wanted to have that was like my dream, Hampton Sides. He's an author I love, and I got invited up to Aspen and interviewed him in front of all like 500 people, nice. And so that was kind of a dream come true. I've had so many people that I would have never thought, like Pete McBride, the National Geographic photographer. I mean, he's a guy that I've admired forever. And I was just emailing with him yesterday about something else. And so it's kind of like all these people that I admired from a distance and thought they were like, had this magic thing going on. I've realized that they're just cool people and they're just doing their thing and they're passionate about what they're doing. And it's kind of taken away some of that, the star power of people, because I've realized everybody's just creative people doing their thing. And it's kind of a refreshing way to look at people and realize nobody's got a secret sauce. They're just doing their thing, Right.
I love that. And I totally agree with you. And I think it is finding what is that thing. And you don't necessarily get to that one thing right away. Again, we talked about that as a personal evolution. So what you said is perfect. Being curious, being willing to put everything that you've got into it, let go of the fears even. I'll just add that in and just continue walking forward, So
yes.
Yeah, that's major. Major. Well, this has been awesome. I've just loved this conversation, getting to know you more. And I am sure that everybody has also really enjoyed it. I feel like we touched on a lot of different areas, and you just have such an interesting life. And I feel like it's just going to open up even more as you continue to open. So Yeah, it's been awesome, Ed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. You do a wonderful job, and I really admire what you're doing, and I appreciate you letting me come on and ramble for a little while.
Oh, it was awesome. And we're going to post Mountain and Prairie podcast in the resources section and places where you can find Ed. And I know you've done actually several sort of live interviews and things like that, which sounds really cool too. So maybe people can find out where you're going to be next and things too. So
yeah, it's all there on the website. That's the best place for everything.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And I just really appreciate it. And any last words of wisdom or anything that you want to share before we sign off?
I would say donate to your local land trust. Find out who's doing good conservation work in your area and give them a few bucks. The nonprofit world, if you're doing it right, you need to be on a shoestring budget. And so they are, and every dollar counts. So they would definitely appreciate it.
I can't tell you, nature, I don't know if it's getting older. I mean, I always loved it when I was a child, like going out and building forts and being outside. There was something that spoke to my soul, being in a wide open space. I went to camp, and being out on the waters and the ocean and everything. And then now living in Marin, I need my forest walk. And I'm so grateful for this open space. And I agree with you. However we can support that, however we can keep beautiful open spaces that we can enjoy, and wildlife and nature and everything. So thank you for all that you do. And yes, people, please, see what is out there for you locally to be able to support and to give. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. And thank you, everyone, for coming and listening and sharing our conversation with you. And we'd love to answer any questions that you might have or any comments. So please feel free to leave those. It's so important that we are here spreading, the word about what everybody's doing and how we're all being curious in our lives, because the world needs you. So whatever that curiosity is that you have, whatever that passion that you have, it's important that you listen to that call, because the world needs you. That's how change begins, is within each one of us. And so if you can really listen to that intuitive purpose and follow that and follow your own evolution, that's how we're going to get to that place of change. And we get to do this together. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Truth and Dare. Namaste.
Thanks for listening to the Truth and Dare podcast at www.camdenhook.com. Join us next time, and let's adventure together.